Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to be letting a couple more people into the room as we go along, but we feel we should get going now, so we respect your time. And again, welcome to all. We're very glad you were able to make it today to the session. And I'm Colin Cameron, founder of Profits for Partners and founder of the law firm Profitability Group, which is hosting today's session. And today's session is called Bringing Ease to Managing a Legal Team, the Surprising Path to Higher Profitability. Now, most lawyers are trained in law school and in their undergrad. They're not trained necessarily to learn how to manage a team and how to understand the economics of a law firm and also delegation and feedback. So those are some of the things we're going to be talking about today. And as lawyers become more senior, they're often expected to lead associates and staff and delegate work, but they're not necessarily trained, and they may not even have mentors within the firm. And so that's another thing we're going to be talking about during the session. And we want to talk about how to make managing a legal team a little bit easier and also more practical. We're going to try to tie in, from my point of view, some of the profitability issues that are related to management. And Sandra is going to be covering, as she does in her practice, feedback and delegation and things. And we're going to have an informal conversation, if you will, over the next 45 minutes. So without further ado, I'm just going to have a quick introduction here of Sandra, who I'm very pleased was able to present here today with me. Sandra is a practice management coach and a certified positive intelligence coach who has spent 20 plus years helping lawyers and other professionals build stronger practices and more rewarding careers. And Sandra will probably tell us a little bit more about her positive intelligence coaching later in the session, which I think you'll find quite interesting. And through Bekhor Management, she works with professional firms on leadership, team management, delegation, communication, marketing, and sustainable growth. And Sandra's also a frequent speaker on with organizations such as the Toronto Lawyers Association and the Canadian Bar Association. And she also hosts the podcast Get in the Driver's Seat, which explores leadership moments in professional practice. So, welcome, Sandra, to the session, and really looking forward to talking about some of these ideas today with you. And we'll note that we have the chat open, so if you wish to chat amongst yourselves or if you have questions for us to address at the end of the session, which we expect will take about 45 minutes, and then we'll have, say, 5 to 6 minutes for questions from the audience, and we can respond directly to your questions. So please put your questions in the chat in block letters, put question if you have a question, so we can distinguish it from other chat that's happening. And so with that, I want to talk just shortly about a couple of the goals we have for today's session. And I'd like to invite you, Sandra, to tell us what you see as the kind of a main goal for our session today.
Well, hi everyone, and thanks for the warm welcome, Colin. So my main goal right now is just to help participants to see that even if you make a small change to your management style, or this may not be about you, you may be here for somebody else on your team. Even if they make a small change in their management style, the impact can be really big, and the impact can, be show up in different ways. One of those ways is profitability.
Yes, and so a couple of other goals for today's session that I was thinking about that we want to help lawyers understand why managing legal teams can feel so difficult. Sometimes we want to offer some practical ways to make that work, that management function easier. And we want to show how better management can improve leverage, team development, and profitability. And finally, we also want to leave everyone with at least one concrete action that they can try, experiment with, if you will, to practice some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to kick it off with our first question for Sandra, which is, why is managing a legal team so challenging?
Okay, so I'm sure everyone in the room has been playing around with AI, and AI is, it doesn't have the challenges of the people. You don't like what AI spits out at you, and you say, change it. Don't like it. And you don't have to be polite. You don't have to say thank you. You don't have to say please. But with people, they have feelings, and it can get messy. So, I mean, that's the primary challenge, but also stress is contagious. So, when one person is feeling stressful, generally that's going to start spreading around, and the other people will feel it too.
And I'd like to explore a little bit that, Sandra. So, one of the reasons why lawyers might be feeling stressed is that they're not trained in how to be a manager and how to delegate and how to provide good feedback on a timely basis. Uh, can you tell us a little bit more about like what say even litigators, they're quite have difficulty with these concepts.
Yes. And so, I mean, this is not taught in law school. Some of the firms are starting to bring these skills in and bring coaches and trainers to start teaching these skills. Um, and so now there are starting to be some role models, but they're not really everywhere. And so, lawyers, you really need role models to learn how to manage people. But the skills that are emphasized in law firms are the more typical legal skills, which use the more critical part of the brain. So assessing for risk, looking for errors, being defensive, finding a good argument. Like these skills use the other part of the part of the mind that is good at being critical. And that is what makes a good lawyer when it comes to the technical skill. But when it comes to managing people, it's the other side of the mind that makes us good managers. The part that has empathy, compassion, the part that knows how to listen and understand. And lawyers have these skills too. It's just a matter of understanding that those are the ones that are actually needed in those conversations.
Hmm. Yeah, my experience with law firms over the years, and I've operated as a chief operating officer, I've operated as a consultant to firms, is the management function, if you will, lawyers have a fair amount of difficulty with, and they don't have a lot of training. So there are different kinds of courses out there that you can take, whether that's at some of the universities or even some of the, you can get like a mini MBA, if you will. There's options like that. But also, lawyers are very difficult uh, in terms of you can't tell them what to do. They're very independent. That's their training. They're trained to be independent, have an independent view, etc. So the term I've heard in the past is it's like herding cats, and you have to persuade cats. You can't necessarily tell them what to do. And so, as a manager of professionals, whether that's lawyers or whether that's engineers or architects, you have to be a coach. And tell us more about how you can be a little bit more of a coach, Sandra.
Right. I mean, in a law firm, you're not selling widgets. You're using brain power. And you want your whole team to be using brain power. You want them to learn good judgment. You want them to learn good people skills. And all of this requires that kind of coaching approach. And that doesn't mean that you need to have, you know, as many coaches as lawyers. What it means is that the lawyers need to learn how to use a coach approach. And so just simple examples of that is instead of being directive, learn how to ask questions. For example, how would you approach this?
Hmm. Yes. And I mean, the other kind of analogy I think about as well is kind of like a hockey team that everybody has their roles. You're a defenseman, so you're ensuring, that the pucks don't get past you. If you're a forward, you're the scorer. You're a business developer, then, you're going to be going in looking for the goals and you're each playing a role. And so you have to get used to kind of like, we're not good at everything. And so that's why some are good at defense, some are good as forwards, but together as a team, we are really effective. And have you seen that in your experience, Sandra?
I mean, I think that the way you're describing it is the ideal scenario where people view it that way, where we each have independent roles and the roles are complementary and where everyone is sort of given some coaching and guidance and encouragement to excel in their role. But where the stress comes in is where people don't actually look at it that way. And they feel the pressure of actually having to do everything themselves, or they compare themselves sort of ruthlessly to others. And then that sort of blurs the lines between the roles and responsibilities.
Hmm. Yes. What I have noticed, and sometimes with lawyers with their training, we can get caught up in the weeds a little bit as opposed to looking, say, more big picture. It's certainly much different than doing legal work. It's a different skill set, and we have to really work at it. And we ideally have mentors that we can look to in the firm that have previously, say, been a managing partner or a practice group leader that we can learn from. And sometimes that can be some of the most effective training that I found in my experience. Okay. Why don't we move on to the next question then, which is you mentioned it briefly there, why it's so stressful, including for um, giving feedback. So litigators who are used to conflict, being in court, etc. So why do we have so much different? Why is it so stressful for us?
I just want to say I've thought about this question a lot, you know, because I work with lawyers and engineers and all kinds of professionals. But it always struck me as sort of mind-boggling that litigators who go defend their clients fearlessly in court, they're actually very hesitant to give feedback to their associates, to their team. And I keep seeing this in my business. And so I really thought about this question. My theory is that when litigators go into court, everything is rule bound. So they can be very polite individuals in their everyday life, but when they go into court, they're actually following the expectations. This is the rules of the court, that they behave in that certain way. So they're not being impolite by speaking up. They're not being rude by, being more aggressive. That's actually their job and it's expected. And when it comes to giving feedback to their associate who they have to work with and be in relationship with every single day, there are no rules for how do you give feedback when that feedback is critical, when that feedback may hurt someone's feelings, and how do you face them the next day when they're still kind of grappling with that?
Hmm. And if you don't give the feedback, that can be very expensive for the firm, can't it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, for example, if, an associate does, a job early in the year, say 3 months in, and it's not quite right, but the senior doesn't give feedback at the time, that'll be repeated on the next file, and then at the end of the year, the associate gets their performance review, and it's oh, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. And the associate's kind of like, gee, I wish I would have known that at the beginning of the year. And not only that, but it's also expensive for the firm because we've got an associate who isn't as productive as they could be during that year. So that can also be a problem as well, right?
Yeah, it's a terrible problem. And honestly, I see it everywhere. This is a really, really big problem. And it's demotivating, it's discouraging, and it holds people back. It doesn't just hold that associate back, it holds the whole team back. The senior lawyer who is holding back in terms of the feedback that they give could have grown to their next level if they were more confident about giving feedback to their team. It would have freed them up to step up into greater leadership.
Hmm. And another thing that we talked about briefly, Sandra, was how your stars are also looking for feedback, not just those who need help. Tell us more about that.
Thank you. I love that you brought this up. So when we talk about, managing the team and giving feedback, everybody always thinks about, oh, that person who's struggling with this or with that. Um, but actually, it's the one that's the superstar that gets forgotten in these conversations. And research shows that they want the feedback at least as much as everybody else, if not more. People who are superstars, and that includes lawyers. I've seen research on all of this. It includes the lawyers. People who are superstars, they want the feedback because they're very driven to grow. They're very driven to learn. And if you ignore them because they're not the one that needs attention, well, they're going to go somewhere else because they want it.
Hmm. And that can be expensive for the firm as well, because then you've got turnover. And I mean, one of the industry numbers I've seen out there is that when you turn over an associate, if they've been with the firm since being a student, and now there are 4 or 5 years of call, firms invested heavily in them, training, supervising them. They're earning a wage, and they may not be billing as effectively, but it's a 300, $500,000 investment that many firms have in their associates. So you can potentially lose that. You've got the hard costs of turnover, but you've also lost the potential for a star in your equity partnership down the road. So it can kind of hit at a number of levels by simply not giving good feedback and giving people some reasons for staying with the firm.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating because that's when they just start to become profitable. That's when they're, see ya.
Yeah, yeah. So that investment is gone effectively. Um, Yeah, so the other thing I have also noticed some firms do is that they have at the beginning of the year, they're going to give associates some feedback on what their goals are for the upcoming year and what their goals are for, the area of practice that they want to develop in, or if they're on partnership track. And so I find that the firms that do that and they actually have each associate has a personal plan for their education and the type of work they're going to be doing. It just needs to be 2 or 3 goals, and then kind of checking in with them, every 90 days or as needed, can be extremely beneficial for the associate and for the firm. Any thoughts on that, Sandra?
Yeah, I think that's the ideal scenario. So we talked before about having this coach approach, having the lawyers take on a coach approach. To me, that's the beginning of the structure, where you decide on these goals rather than these long performance reviews. And if your firm's using them and you're happy with them, that's fine. You just add this on as a layer, where you pick 1, 2, or 3 goals rather than the whole list of everything that's on that performance review, and make it manageable and make it prioritized so that people can actually make progress and have conversations about what are the things that can help for you to improve on these specific things.
Hmm. Hmm. Let's move to another question, and that is how can lawyers give constructive feedback and make it feel motivating or make it motivating for the associate?
Right. And so this question is wonderful because in the question, you're helping people to realize that it's actually an option, not only to figure out a better way to give feedback, but to do it in a way that is motivating. Why are lawyers and other professionals steering away from these feedback conversations? Because it's so stressful. It's stressful for the person giving the feedback. It's stressful for the person receiving the feedback, right? It's going to the dentist. And so it's not even on their minds as a possibility that there's another way to have these conversations that not only is less stressful, but it's motivating. And the way to do that is to hang all of your comments on that person's aspirations. Everything you do is in service of helping them to grow along their career path. You are there to help them.
Hmm. Yeah, I've always been a believer myself that you want to build a team around you where those folks are actually better than you, the leader, at certain things. And this also helps building the benefits of having a team where we each have our specific strengths and skills. So that's another way to do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But, I think really critical to making this work is to get to know each person and what motivates them, what they care about, what their aspirations are, and in a very one-to-one way, as opposed to treating everyone as the same.
Hmm. Yes, because we're not. We all are
Oh,
individuals and we all
yeah,
have different needs. So I find sometimes firms try to, this is how we do it, we're going to check how you're doing every 90 days and these are the things you want. But every individual may have different goals and objectives, and they may be at different phases in their career and have different strengths, right?
exactly. And so they may need more attention at one point in their career and less attention at another point. So even a specific individual needs to have, the coaching that they receive customized to the time in their career.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Let's move on now to delegation. And so, how can we help, uh, say, partners and seniors in our firms? How can we help them to overcome the resistance to delegate more to their teams?
Okay, so the starting point to me is to understand where does that resistance come from, what's underneath it. Because if you don't face that, you can give them all the techniques. It's not really going to work because they're still struggling with something. And what's underneath that is a fear of losing control.
Hmm. Yeah. And we all want control, right? We want to control our destiny. But the other part of it I also find is that sometimes partners want control because maybe that's partly how they're compensated. They may have, they built a practice and they have a team and people are doing things, as part of that team and to, meet the needs of the clients in that practice. But the partner may be compensated based on billable hours in many cases, and that compensation system may also lead some to maybe I'm not going to delegate as much here because I have a minimum billable hour target or I have a minimum billings, which are driven by the amount of my billable hours. So that can be an issue as well, right?
Well, I mean, that's short-term thinking because if they invest time in training and training their team, yes, it's true they'll lose on the billable hours in the short term. But if they do it in a way that the team bonds and and they're really seen as a mentor and that people want to stay, the keepers want to stay, well, at the end of the day, their profitability will rise over the long term. Um,
Yeah.
and with respect to that particular issue.
Yeah, and it's so important that that delegation happens because, I mean, number one, succession. We want to keep those stars and give them the work that is going to satisfy them and give, interesting, complex work that shouldn't necessarily be done by a partner, can easily be done by an associate. So that's one part of it. But the firm also gains profitability through that delegation process. That work should go down to the appropriate level as much as possible, where it's done as cost effectively and cost efficiently as possible, for, billing the clients as well. Why have a partner being paid 700 or $1,000 an hour that they're paying as opposed to an associate more in the, say, 400 or 500, or, in that range, $300 to $500. So it makes sense for firms as well as clients to have work delegated down in many cases. I will note here, of course, AI starts to creep into the discussion as well. So some of that work that's being done by associates at the junior level is now going to be done by AI, especially at the very lower end. And so then that's going to affect how we delegate. And are we delegating to people? Or are we delegating through technology? But all the same principles apply for delegation, right?
Absolutely. And I can say a little bit more about the overcoming of that fear of losing control, which is where we started this particular conversation. Um, the the fear of losing control is different for each individual. So it's not a general blanket, you know, experience for all of the lawyers. And in fairness to everybody that experiences this, Colin, you're right. Every lawyer has legitimate reason for feeling this fear of losing control. Whether that's about their billable hours and their immediate short-term profitability, or it's about their reputation, fearing mistakes, fearing that they'll lose their client if they're late or if something isn't as good as it would have been if they did it. So we don't want to be dismissive about what people are feeling fearful about. Those are legitimate reasons to feel fear. What we want to do is sort of shine a light on why each individual is feeling that. And the reason we do that is because it can help with good steps to get away from it. So, as an example, if somebody has the personality of being a controller, and that means the controller personality is I like to control the way other people behave. This will show up when that lawyer is feeling stressed. When this lawyer is not feeling stressed, you won't feel that controller energy. Instead, what you will feel is their ability to influence, their ability to harness other people's, enthusiasm and get their team excited to move forward. So the idea is, okay, if that person is feeling I'm a controller, I want to make sure that this person does things exactly the way I do. If they're able to understand that that's where the way they're being triggered, and to look at things in a way that is a little bit more objective, they may come to realize that their team is actually doing a great job, even if they're not doing it exactly the way that lawyer would have done it.
Hmm. Yeah, you have to let go your fear of it not being done perhaps the way you would do it, exactly the way you do it. You have to give your team the ability to grow and to make calculated small mistakes that of course you'll be reviewing the work after, but that's part of their development and their growth, right? You have to let go of some of that control.
And that's just one personality type. So I really want to stress that, the root underneath those feelings of losing that control is different for each individual.
Yes. And it reminds me somewhat of lawyers in terms of the personalities of lawyers compared to, say, the general population. I have seen, for example, surveys by Dr. Larry Richard in the past where, lawyers on the scale compared to the average population, perhaps would you say they're more controlling than perhaps the some in the general population? He also noted there's some issues or say habits of lawyers or their personalities that you're quite critical more than the general population, or you're more detail oriented, etc. And would you agree with that kind of analysis?
I would just say that the job encourages certain traits to show up. So it's not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily say that, individuals who become lawyers have these personality types. I mean, I can't comment on that, to be honest. But I would say that the job encourages those characteristics. It encourages people to be hyper vigilant, to be almost paranoid about making a mistake. That's the job, right? That's what clients are paying for. And so then those same characteristics can sort of come back to bite you in a different setting. Managing your team requires a different skill set.
Yeah. And I want to hear a little bit more than I mentioned very briefly as I introduced you about positive intelligence and some of the things that may be holding us back as individuals in terms of how we operate in management positions when we're within law firms. Can you elaborate a little bit about some of I'll call them, I don't know, hindrances, what's holding us back in certain cases, whether it's delegating or providing feedback or fear of conflict when you're giving feedback? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. And, sort of briefly, the positive intelligence approach, that's where I did my training, got certified as a coach. Um, Basically, did tons of studies to understand our behavior, and they came up with 9 saboteurs. So, what that means is there are 9 personality types that help us to understand how we behave when we're stressed. And these are very intuitive. So things like people pleaser, which I have, hello. And so the way that will show up in this kind of situation is if a lawyer is asked, senior lawyer is asked to sort of give difficult feedback to their team, and they want their team to like them, it's going to be really hard for this person to say what they need to say without having clear intention, without practicing, without learning the right words, without learning how to present this in a way that that other person feels cared for.
Hmm. Yes, and apparently there's surveys that can be done which you can participate in to understand where you as an individual, what are your saboteurs, which is a new term for me, and I'm sure our audience as well. But I kind of think of it like what hindrances or something that's holding you back.
Yes, and so all of these 9 saboteurs, they hold us back. That's very true, but they only hold us back when we're in stress mode. Every one of those 9 saboteurs sits on a strength. And so the idea in this work is to reclaim the strength. So I briefly introduced the people pleaser, which everybody knows is, very sort of unpleasant behavior. Underneath that too is a strength. And so people pleasers, they tend to be empathetic, they tend to be understanding, helpful, caring. That's very natural to the people pleaser without needing anything in return when they're feeling strong and calm.
Hmm. Yes. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that near the end of the session, but
Okay.
it's an interesting concept. Again, I hadn't heard much about it before, especially in this context with law firm management. So really appreciate that point of view, if you will, perspective. So let's talk a little bit more about when partners are stressed or rushed, what habits are showing up that erode profit?
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure everyone in this room has seen this. Micromanagement, that's a very typical stress response. That if you're feeling fearful for all the good reasons we raised before, your reputation's on the line, your client is very aggressively calling you all the time for results or for details. And so you're feeling distrustful of your team. Maybe they've made mistakes before, maybe they're new. And so you checking in on them over and over and over. And that actually is counterproductive.
Hmm. And that would affect profit most certainly, because then again, we're not delegating to the right level, which is the more profitable level where it's more cost effectively done by an associate. And the partner may be driven by, I've got to get my billable hours. I've got to get them. I have a minimum of, I don't know, 1,400 or 1,600 billable hours. And so then that can also put stress on them. And something that firms should also look at their compensation systems to think about, well, how much are we actually rewarding partners for spending time on management and good feedback and delegation? What I find with many firms, especially smaller mid-sized firms, may be driven more by the billable hours and more by, say, I'll call them eat what you kill kinds of compensation systems, which are very driven by billable hours or your production. But we also need to make room to reward partners for the non-billable functions, such as management and training and supervision of associates and staff as well, paralegals, et cetera, and getting work down to the right levels. And I often hear the term, well, I got to spend my time on billable functions as opposed to non-billable. But those non-billable functions, they may be non-billable now, short term, but long term, good management and good delegation and good feedback is going to pay off on the bottom line. So it's kind of like an iceberg. You've got all we see is the financial statement, profit, the revenue, and the costs, et cetera, but we don't see underneath all of that non-billable, but I would say eventually billable productive time that's not necessarily going into billings and billable hours right now. So firms have to be cognizant of that as well. Any thoughts on anything I'm talking about there?
Absolutely. I think it's such a good point, and I love how you always bring it back to the long term, Colin. I know that a lot of law firms use metrics for billable hours, and other sort of business functions. But I would say that you can add metrics for these other things. There's a tool that I've used with some clients called the balanced scorecard. And what it does is it has four quadrants so that you're choosing your metrics that is in a balanced way. Some things are about finances, some things are about learning and development, and some things are about short term, some things are about long term, without making it too heavy in terms of the number of metrics. You're choosing them so that they basically have the wellness of the firm in mind. And you can measure whether or not somebody is doing a good job in growing their team. You can come up with metrics that actually measure this.
I totally agree with you on this, Sandra. The balanced scorecard is something I have followed for a number of years. And what I like to do with firms in terms of, say, the managing partner, that they should be compensated to a large degree based on a balanced scorecard, because much of their time may be spent on non-billable functions. But those leadership functions, I mean, a good managing partner that's effective can add millions to the bottom line if they're effective in inculcating that kind of a culture of, we're a team, we're going to grow the whole pie. I mean, again, it's you get massive amounts of benefit from doing that. So I love that. It's something we haven't talked about yet, and this is so appropriate for today. I mean, and your compensation system at your law firm should definitely take that into account, not just for the managing partner, but for practice group leaders and individual partners in terms of a piece of your comp is going to be determined by how you are focused on these long-term profit motivators and metrics. And these things can be turned into metrics, and then you can tie them in those metrics with the firm's goals over the next 3, 5, 10 years. And again, partners can also have their own personal plans which start to focus on maybe partner A, you should do some more delegating down to your, three associates, or you should be providing more feedback on a more regular basis. So those are more ways that this all ties in. This non-billable piece can become much more, help a firm become much more profitable. Any final thoughts on the balance scorecard or any of the ideas here, Sandra?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to sort of have a more balanced approach like this because I have seen, where you have one partner who is sort of carrying the burden of building the practice, whether they're the practice manager or not, and they can get resentful. Everybody else is sort of just they get into a habit of leaving it to one or two individuals to sort of handle that for them, and it's not really fair. And I think that if you have a tool like the balanced scorecard, it creates more visibility and accountability across the board.
Hmm. Most definitely. Fantastic. And so, last question for you. What is, say, one simple experiment or learning that we can suggest that lawyers can do based on the content in this session, or to improve their management skills?
Well, I'm going to return to what we talked about at the beginning, which is having those coaching conversations with your team. So what I would say is creating a structure where you have a senior lawyer meeting with each of their associates or, their clerk, whoever is reporting to them, meeting with each person one on one, not to discuss the work, to discuss their development in a regular fashion with respect to specific goals for that person's growth. And that person gets to have input on what those goals are.
Yeah, that's so important to get people involved with the goals, and then understanding how they can really make a change that benefits them. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the presentation part of our session. And so I guess why don't we open it up to the audience now for any questions? And let's see, I see a couple of comments were made during the session. I think, can we allow the audience to
Yeah,
uh,
I just want to say this session has been recorded, and I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can have more participation by the people who are here.
fantastic. Okay.